My name is Daniel Carter, and until last spring, I thought buying my dream ranch outside Cedar Ridge would be the best decision I'd ever made. The property wasn't flashy. It had a weathered farmhouse, an old red barn, and nearly 60 acres of peaceful land surrounded by oak trees. What made it special wasn't the buildings, it was the location. My land bordered the only private road connecting a brand new luxury subdivision to the state highway. Years ago, the developer had built the neighborhood under a temporary road use agreement with the previous owner of my ranch. That agreement expired shortly before I purchased the property, but nobody bothered mentioning it during closing because everyone assumed it would simply be renewed. For the first few months, life was quiet. Every morning I watched expensive SUVs roll past my front porch while I drank coffee. I waved at neighbors and most waved back. I honestly had no interest in causing trouble. Then the HOA board changed. Their new president, Linda Harrison, believed the subdivision owned everything within sight. She started sending me letters about my property. First, it was my tractor being visible from the community entrance. Then it was my barn needing architectural improvements. Finally, she claimed my split-rail fence violated neighborhood standards, even though my ranch wasn't even part of the HOA. I laughed the first time I opened one of her letters. Then another arrived. And another. Every week there seemed to be a new complaint. I ignored them because I knew they had no authority over my land. Or at least that's what I believed. One Friday afternoon, I came home to find a certified envelope taped to my front door. Inside was a notice demanding payment of $50,000. According to the HOA, I had accumulated hundreds of daily fines for refusing to comply with their landscaping rules, parking regulations, and architectural guidelines. The letter warned that failure to pay within 30 days would result in legal action. I actually thought it was a joke. I drove straight to the HOA office. Linda was sitting behind a polished wooden desk wearing a smile that disappeared the moment she saw me. I placed the notice in front of her and asked if someone had made a mistake. She folded her hands calmly. "No mistake," she said. "Your property negatively affects our community values." I reminded her that my ranch wasn't inside the HOA boundaries. She smiled even wider. "Our attorneys disagree." That sentence changed everything. I hired a real estate attorney the following Monday. After reviewing every document from my purchase, he leaned back in his chair with a puzzled expression. "They can't fine you," he said. I smiled with relief. But I hated hearing that word. "There's something much more interesting." He pulled out an old survey map dating back nearly 40 years. The subdivision's entrance road crossed a narrow strip of land that had never been transferred to the developer. I stared at the map. "Who owns it?" He looked directly at me. "The previous owner." "And who owns his estate now?" He smiled. "It just went up for auction." Suddenly, the $50,000 fine didn't seem nearly as important anymore. Instead of preparing to defend myself against the HOA, I started researching one forgotten piece of land that everyone else had ignored. Little did Linda know, the road her entire neighborhood depended on wasn't theirs. And within 2 weeks, it was going to be mine. The auction took place on a rainy Thursday morning at the county courthouse. There weren't many people there. Most were investors looking for farmland or abandoned properties. Nobody seemed interested in a narrow strip of gravel and asphalt that barely showed up on the county map. To everyone else, it looked worthless. To me, it looked like the most valuable piece of land in the entire county. My attorney sat beside me as the bidding began. The parcel came up nearly 2 hours after the auction started. The opening bid was only $5,000. One developer raised it to $6,000, probably assuming he could flip it later. I offered $7,000. He hesitated before going to $7,500. I answered with $8,000. After a long silence, he shook his head and stepped back. The gavel came down. Sold. Just like that, I became the legal owner of the only road connecting more than 300 luxury homes to the public highway. I didn't celebrate. Instead, my attorney immediately filed the deed with the county recorder's office. By the end of the afternoon, every document had been processed. The ownership was official. For the next few days, I did absolutely nothing. Every morning, Hundreds of cars continued driving across my property. School buses, delivery trucks, landscaping companies, garbage collectors, moving vans, they all used the road exactly as before. I didn't block traffic. I didn't charge anyone. I simply watched. Then Linda's attorney sent me another letter. This one was even more aggressive than the last. It demanded immediate payment of the $50,000 HOA fine and threatened to place a lien on my ranch if I refused. The letter claimed I was knowingly violating community standards and warned that additional penalties would be added every day. I couldn't help laughing. Instead of responding to the fine, my attorney mailed them something far more interesting. It was a formal notice explaining that I was now the legal owner of the subdivision's entrance road. The temporary easement allowing residents to use the road had expired years earlier and had never been renewed. The letter politely requested that the HOA contact us within 15 days to negotiate a new access agreement. 3 days later, Linda showed up at my front gate. She climbed out of her luxury SUV wearing expensive sunglasses and carrying a folder stuffed with paperwork. "You think this is funny?" she asked. "No," I replied. "I think it's business." She insisted the residents had used the road for years and therefore had permanent rights to it. I asked if she had any recorded easement proving that claim. She couldn't produce one. Instead, she accused me of trying to extort the neighborhood. I reminded her that she was the one demanding $50,000 from someone who wasn't even part of her HOA. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, she said, "You'll never get away with this." I smiled. "I'm not asking anyone for money. I'm asking for a legal agreement." She stormed back to her SUV and drove away. The following week, the HOA's attorneys filed an emergency lawsuit asking the court to stop me from interfering with the road. They claimed the subdivision would suffer irreparable harm if access were restricted. The judge scheduled a hearing within days. When the hearing began, the HOA attorney painted me as a greedy landowner trying to hold an entire community hostage. Then my attorney stood up. He presented the original property records, the expired road use agreement, the newly recorded deed, and every survey confirming that I legally owned the land beneath the road. The courtroom became unusually quiet. The judge flipped through the documents one page at a time. Finally, he looked toward the HOA attorney. "Do you have a recorded permanent easement?" The attorney hesitated. "No, Your Honor." The judge nodded slowly. "Then the property owner appears to be acting within his legal rights." Linda's confident smile disappeared instantly. The judge denied the emergency request but encouraged both sides to negotiate in good faith before the case returned to court. Outside the courthouse, reporters were already waiting. One of them asked Linda whether the neighborhood really had no legal right to use its own entrance road. She refused to answer. I simply told the reporters one sentence. "I've always been willing to make a fair agreement." By sunset, the story was spreading across local news stations, and homeowners throughout the subdivision were beginning to ask a question their HOA board couldn't answer. By the next morning, the entire subdivision was in chaos. Residents weren't angry at me. They were angry at the HOA board. The local news had picked up the story, and every report repeated the same fact. The neighborhood had been using a private road for years without securing a permanent legal easement. Homeowners who had paid hundreds of thousands of dollars for their houses suddenly realized that the board they trusted had ignored one of the most important legal details in the entire development. My phone started ringing nonstop. Some callers yelled before I could even say hello, accusing me of trying to destroy their community. Others were surprisingly calm. A retired couple apologized for the HOA's behavior and admitted they had no idea the board had been sending me threatening letters. Several homeowners even asked if they could meet me in person to hear my side of the story. I agreed. That Saturday afternoon, nearly 30 residents gathered outside my ranch. I brought out folding chairs and a cooler filled with bottled water. Instead of arguing, I showed them every document. I passed around copies of the expired road use agreement, the county survey, the deed proving I owned the property, and the letters demanding I pay $50,000 in HOA fines. The mood changed completely. People who had arrived expecting to confront me were now staring silently at the paperwork. One man finally spoke. "So, They fined you even though you're not in the HOA? That's correct, I replied. And they never told us the road wasn't ours? I shook my head. Several residents exchanged nervous looks. An older woman quietly said, "We've been paying special assessments for years to maintain that road." Everyone turned toward her. "What do you mean?" someone asked. She explained that the HOA had collected thousands of dollars every year for road maintenance, resurfacing, drainage repairs, and snow removal. If the HOA didn't even own the road, everyone wanted to know exactly where that money had gone. Within hours, homeowners were demanding access to the HOA's financial records. Linda refused. She claimed the records were confidential until the annual meeting. That answer only made people more suspicious. 3 days later, dozens of residents packed the HOA clubhouse for an emergency board meeting. I wasn't invited, but several homeowners recorded the entire event on their phones. The videos spread across social media that same night. Residents repeatedly asked one simple question: "Where is the money?" Linda avoided giving a direct answer. Instead, she insisted the board had always acted in the community's best interest and blamed me for creating unnecessary conflict. The crowd wasn't buying it anymore. Voices grew louder. One homeowner stood up holding copies of my legal documents. He asked why the board had threatened an innocent property owner instead of solving the road issue years ago. Linda couldn't answer. Another resident demanded to know why the HOA had spent nearly $200,000 in legal fees over the previous 3 years. Again, no clear explanation. The meeting ended in complete disorder. The following week, something unexpected happened. The HOA's insurance company sent representatives to inspect the situation. After reviewing the lawsuit and property records, they informed the board that the policy might not cover legal claims resulting from negligence involving property rights. That meant every dollar spent fighting me could eventually come directly from the HOA's budget. The board members suddenly realized they had a much bigger problem than one stubborn ranch owner. Meanwhile, I continued treating the road exactly as I always had. Traffic flowed normally. No gates, no barricades, no toll booths. Every interview I gave ended with the same statement: "I'm happy to sign a fair agreement. All I want is respect for my property and reimbursement for the legal costs your HOA forced me to incur." Public opinion shifted quickly. Even local newspapers began criticizing the HOA for escalating a dispute that never should have existed. Then my attorney received something we had been waiting for: a formal request from the HOA. They wanted to negotiate, not because they suddenly respected me, because they had finally realized they couldn't win. And what happened inside that negotiation room? The negotiation meeting was held 2 weeks later in a conference room at the county administration building. Sitting across the table were Linda, 2 HOA board members, their attorney, the subdivision's property manager, my attorney, and me. The atmosphere was completely different from the first time I had walked into the HOA office. Back then, they had treated me like an inconvenience. Now they barely looked me in the eye. Linda cleared her throat. "Mr. Carter," she began, "we believe it's in everyone's best interest to resolve this matter." I nodded. "I've believed that from the beginning." Their attorney slid a stack of papers across the table. The HOA offered to withdraw the $50,000 fine, dismiss the lawsuit, and recognize that my ranch was completely outside the HOA's jurisdiction. In exchange, they wanted a permanent easement across my road for $1. My attorney didn't even touch the documents. Instead, he pushed them back across the table. "That won't work." The room fell silent. I opened a folder and laid out my proposal. First, every fine, notice, and violation ever issued against me would be permanently canceled in writing. Second, the HOA would publicly acknowledge that it had no authority over my property. Third, they would reimburse every dollar of my legal expenses, survey costs, title research, and court filing fees. Fourth, they would pay fair market value for a permanent recorded easement based on an independent appraisal. Finally, the HOA would create a maintenance agreement making them fully responsible for future repairs, insurance, drainage, snow removal, and liability on the road. Linda stared at the proposal. "That's outrageous." I looked at her calmly. No. Sending me a $50,000 fine for rules that never applied to my property was outrageous. No one spoke for several seconds. The mediator finally broke the silence. Perhaps both sides should take a short break. During that break, homeowners waiting outside approached me. They weren't there to pressure me. They apologized. Several admitted they had voted for Linda because they believed she would protect property values. Instead, she had dragged the entire neighborhood into an expensive legal disaster. One man shook my hand. I wish we'd listened sooner. An hour later, negotiations resumed. This time, the HOA's attorney did almost all the talking. The tone had changed completely. After several more hours of discussion, we reached an agreement. The HOA accepted every major condition. The $50,000 fine disappeared forever. The lawsuit was dismissed. The HOA paid all of my legal expenses. An independent appraiser determined the value of the permanent easement, and the HOA paid me a substantial six-figure amount for the legal right to continue using the road. The agreement was recorded with the county, ensuring that future homeowners would never face the same problem again. But the story didn't end there. A month later, the annual HOA election took place. Nearly every homeowner showed up. Linda and the entire board were voted out by an overwhelming margin. The new board introduced transparent financial reporting, independent audits, and stricter oversight of every major decision. They even invited me to attend their first community meeting, not as an opponent, but as a guest. I accepted. When I arrived, dozens of residents greeted me with smiles. The new HOA president stood up and addressed the room. "Mr. Carter," he said, "on behalf of this community, I'd like to apologize for everything that happened. We hope this marks a new beginning." I stood, thanked everyone, and replied with a simple message. Good neighbors solve problems with conversations. Bad neighbors solve them with threats. The room erupted in applause. As I drove home that evening, I passed the same entrance road that had caused so much conflict. Nothing looked different. Cars still drove by. Children still rode their bicycles. Families still walked their dogs. But one thing had changed forever. That road was no longer a symbol of intimidation. It had become a reminder that no matter how powerful an HOA believes it is, respect for property rights and for your neighbors will always matter more than empty threats. And every time I pass that stretch of pavement, I can't help but smile, because the HOA thought a $50,000 fine would force me to surrender. Instead,